What if I told you that your great-grandmother possessed a secret medical and financial superpower that you've completely forgotten? She didn't have a Pinterest board, she didn't have a food processor, and she certainly didn't have a superfood aisle. What she had was a heavy cast-iron skillet and the ancestral knowledge to feed a family of 8 on about 30 cents. While modern food companies have spent billions trying to convince us that cooking is too hard and too slow, they've effectively made us forget that the women who raised this country on bean soup and cornbread weren't just cooking poor, they were cooking genius. Welcome to the channel. Today, we're stepping back into the kitchens that smelled of wood smoke and rendered lard to rediscover 30 survival meals that are actually more nutritious and flavorful than almost anything you can buy in a box today. Before we start this countdown of culinary wisdom, do me a quick favor, hit that subscribe button. We're on a mission to reclaim the kitchen skills the big food corporations wanted us to lose, and I'd love to have you along for the journey. 30. Cornmeal mush. It sounds humble, maybe even a little boring, but cornmeal mush was the ultimate transformer. Grandma would stir cornmeal, water, and a pinch of salt in a heavy pot until it was thick enough to pull away from the sides. She'd pour it into a loaf pan to cool overnight. By morning, it was sliced thick and fried in a hot pan until the outside was a shatteringly crisp gold and the inside was soft as silk. In the 1930s, 3 cents of cornmeal fed a family of 5 for 2 days. Today, fancy restaurants call it polenta and charge $15 a plate. 29. Milk toast. This was the ultimate hug from the inside. Just 3 ingredients: toasted bread, warm milk, and a pat of butter. It was the meal for the sick, the weary, or the 3 days before payday when the cupboard was bare. It was so basic that people were often embarrassed to admit they ate it, yet it kept families from Tennessee to Oregon warm and full through the darkest winters. 28. Fried green tomatoes. Before the movie made this dish a southern icon, it was a practical survival trick. Every garden had tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before the first frost. You didn't waste them. You sliced them, dredged them in cornmeal, and fried them in bacon drippings. The tartness of the green fruit cut through the rich fat perfectly. It wasn't a recipe. It was a reflex. 27. Crackling cornbread. When Grandma rendered lard from pork fat, she was left with cracklings, the crispy, salty bits of gold at the bottom of the pot. She folded those right into her cornbread batter. They added a smoky richness that turned plain bread into a feast. This was the original zero-waste cooking. Every part of the hog had a job to do. 26. Dandelion greens with hot bacon dressing. Tenant farmers knew something your doctor is just now figuring out. Dandelion greens are packed with iron and vitamins. In early spring, and when the root cellar was empty, Grandma would walk the yard with a knife. She'd wilt those free greens with hot bacon fat and a splash of vinegar. Modern nutritionists call it a superfood. Grandma just called it supper. 25. Salt pork and beans. This is the pot that built the American South. A pound of pinto beans and a piece of salt pork simmered for 6 hours until the broth turned silky. In 1935, this cost less than 8 cents and provided a nutritionally complete meal. Whether in a Kentucky coal camp or a Chicago immigrant kitchen, this pot was the heartbeat of the home. 24. Vinegar pie. It sounds like a mistake, doesn't it? But when lemons were too expensive and fruit was out of season, Depression-era cooks used apple cider vinegar to mimic the tartness of lemon curd. Baked into a crust, it set into a smooth, bright custard. It was a 3-cent way to put a luxury treat on a Sunday table. 22. Potato pancakes, known as latkes in Jewish households or Kartoffelpuffer in German ones, these were the genius answer to leftover potatoes. Grate them, squeeze the water out, mix with a little flour and salt, and fry. Crispy edges, tender centers, it turned a humble tuber into a celebration. But here's the surprising part. In 1953, the Campbell Soup Company hired a team of home economists with a specific mission: convince American women that scratch cooking was too complicated and that opening a can was progress. They flooded magazines with fake columns and sponsored radio shows to kill off the knowledge your grandmother held. It worked. Within a generation, the 3-ingredient bean soup was replaced by a can of cream of mushroom. The industry didn't make us better cooks, they just made us better customers. 21. Pot liquor and cornbread. The liquid left over from boiling greens is called pot liquor, and it contains every vitamin that cooked out of the vegetables. Grandma would crumble cornbread into a bowl of this smoky, mineral-dense broth. It was considered the poorest meal you could eat, but modern science says it's one of the most mineral-rich preparations in American history. 20. Tomato gravy. On mornings when the egg money ran out, Grandma made gravy. She'd cook flour in bacon drippings until golden, then stir in stewed tomatoes. In it went over biscuits or fried mush, tangy, rich and savory. It was insurance against an empty morning. 19. Cornbread and buttermilk. This isn't a recipe, it's a ritual. Cold buttermilk poured over crumbled cornbread in a tall glass, eaten with a long spoon. It softens into a pudding-like consistency. Old men still remember coming in from the fields and eating this standing up. It built strong bones long before fast food took over. 18. Bread pudding. Stale bread was never thrown away. Tearing it up and soaking it in milk, eggs, and a dash of nutmeg turned a mistake into a custardy golden dessert. It's now a staple in upscale bistros for $12 a portion, but Grandma used it to make sure nothing was wasted. 17. Dried apple stack cake. This cake kept Appalachian families fed through winters where the wells froze solid, as apples were dried in the summer and reconstituted in the winter. Thin rounds of dough were baked like cookies and stacked with spiced apple filling. It required no refrigeration and could stay fresh for 2 weeks. At 1920s weddings, guests would each bring a layer. A 12-layer cake meant a very popular bride. 16. Fried salt pork. Salt pork was cheaper than bacon and cheaper than ham. Sliced thin, rolled in flour, and fried until it crackled, it provided the essential protein for railroad workers and mill hands. The leftover pan drippings became white gravy, a staple born from a pan that couldn't afford to be wasted. And this is where things get interesting. In 2017, researchers at the University of Georgia analyzed the nutrition of these exact Depression-era meals. They found that a simple serving of pinto beans, salt pork, and cornbread covered almost every daily requirement for fiber, protein, and B vitamins for a grown man doing heavy labor, all for less than a dime. Grandma wasn't just getting by, she was outperforming modern processed diets. 15. Syrup sandwich. In the rural South, sugar was a luxury, but cane syrup or sorghum was local and cheap. Butter spread on white bread with a drizzle of amber syrup was a breakfast, a lunch pail staple, and a snack. It was given with love, and that was the whole recipe. 14. Bean soup with ham hock. 1 ham hock, 1 pound of dried beans, and a lot of thyme. By evening, the kitchen smelled like a 5-star smokehouse. This pot fed 12 people for dinner and tomorrow's lunch. It's still served in the US Senate cafeteria today, though they rarely mention its humble roots. 13. Our egg drop soup. Long before the local takeout spot existed, farm wives made this. If you had chicken broth and a few eggs, you had a meal. Drizzling beaten eggs into simmering broth created white and gold ribbons of pure nourishment. Simple, salt of the earth, and done in 5 minutes. 12. Fried potatoes and onions. This was Tuesday night in 10,000 households for 50 years. Sliced potatoes and onions caramelized in a cast-iron skillet with a spoonful of bacon drippings. It was a side dish that became the main event when the money ran out on the Friday before payday. 11. Crackers and milk. A handful of saltines crumbled into a bowl of cold milk with a pinch of salt. It sounds primitive, but it satisfied an animal hunger late at night when the stove had been cold for hours. It was the ultimate make-do meal. That what the supermarket took away wasn't just a recipe, it was a legacy. There are women still alive today who raised 7 children on a farm with 1 hog and a garden. They knew the nutritional value of a dandelion and the exact number of meals in a single ham hock. Their grandchildren, however, have lost that thread. Somewhere around 1965, the knowledge of how to boil a bean died out in favor of convenience. That's not progress. It's a generational theft. 10. Wacky cake. Also called depression cake, this was a marvel of chemistry. No eggs, no butter, no milk. During wartime rationing, bakers discovered that vinegar and baking soda could make a chocolate cake rise perfectly. It was dark, moist, and cost almost nothing. 9. Milk gravy and biscuits. The holy trinity of poverty food. Flour, milk, and grease. Grandma could have this on the table in 20 minutes, using only pantry staples. It was proof that 3 ingredients, managed correctly, could produce abundance in a time of lack. 8. Pinto beans and cornbread. This is the meal that defines an entire era of American resilience. Across Appalachia and the South, this pot was on the stove every single day. You broke the cornbread into the beans and ate from a chipped bowl. Those who ate this lived long, sturdy lives. 7. Fried mush. Frying the previous night's cornmeal, mush changed its soul. Sliced and fried until it had a dark golden crust, then drizzled with syrup, it felt like a luxury breakfast. A pound of cornmeal could feed a family of 6 for 3 days straight. 6. The water pie. This is the most desperate meal on the list, born when there was absolutely nothing in the house. A pie shell filled with water, flour, sugar, and a bit of butter. It baked into a translucent sweet custard. It was a point of pride. Even if there was no food, no one would be served an empty plate. 5. Rice and gravy, a staple of Cajun and working-class Louisiana cooking. White rice topped with a thin gravy made from pan drippings and browned bits. Rice was cheap, filling, and didn't argue. 4. Bean bread, a Cherokee tradition that survived the Trail of Tears and the Depression. Cooked beans folded into cornmeal dough and boiled. It was a portable, self-contained meal that provided perfect protein without needing a single side dish. 3. Dried pea soup. Scientists measured the nutrition of split pea soup in 2019 and were stunned. It provides more fiber and potassium per serving than almost any other food. In 1940, it cost 14 cents to feed a family. It's a masterclass in economy. 2. Fatback and greens. This isn't bacon, it's pure salted fat. Dropped into a pot of collards for 2 hours, it creates soul food in its purest form. Enslaved people took the parts of the hog nobody else wanted and turned them into the foundation of a global cuisine. 1. Cornbread, milk, and onion. The ultimate end-of-the-day ritual, a wedge of hot cornbread, a glass of cold buttermilk, and a raw onion sliced thin. The sharpness of the onion cuts through the fat, the milk settles the stomach. It's a meal that puts the day to bed with dignity. I want to challenge you this week. Try just one of these. Make a pot of bean soup or fry some cornmeal mush for breakfast. When you taste it, you aren't just eating a cheap meal. You're tasting the resilience of the women who built this country. They understood their ingredients, they wasted nothing, and they fed the world on less than we spend on a single latte. The food industry spent 70 years trying to make us forget these meals because they couldn't figure out how to put Grandma's genius in a plastic box. It's time we remembered. Comment below and tell me which one of these your grandmother used to make. I want to know which kitchens still hold on to these memories. And if you found this helpful, please give us a subscribe to help keep these traditions alive. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.